Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello, this is Aaron West. I am the author of the A24 New Wave. In this book, I look at A24's output and I make the argument that we are in a new wave movement right now. A24 plays a major role. This book has a supplemental podcast where each episode is a brief conversation about an A24 related topic, whether an actor, director, or even a genre. As I continue research for the book and conduct interviews, I expect to record podcast episodes with people involved with the company. You can find the podcast at cinejourneys.com or wherever you find podcasts, and we are proud to be members of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Dark destinations.
These may be end times, night creature. Why would a few more casualties trouble me?
Because their blood will join yours.
A radio drama anthology.
You are wrong.
How you figure? Every merc on Mongo is hunting you down.
Not you. Your partner. He said I didn't have a ray gun.
Full cast performances set in the haunted corners of the globe.
Darkness is coming for you.
That's the fear that haunts me. Sleep!
Dark Destinations by Father Malone at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Viewers, Father Malone here, and I'd like to welcome you to a special bonus series. We've been slugging it out in the horror anthology trenches for years now, and felt as though the chaff sometimes overwhelms the bloody wheat in our discussions. To that end, we've decided to throw a spotlight on some of the more superlative segments from the various and disparate series. These aren't arranged in any kind of merit-based system nor chronological. That would be way too organized. Instead, I'm starting the series with my personal favorite episode of The Twilight Zone 1985. That was the first remake or reboot of Rod Serling's classic from the golden age of television. From that iteration, a veritable dream team of creatives was assembled. Wes Craven, Harlan Ellison, William Friedkin, Peter Medak, George R.R. Martin, Ray Bradbury, and on and on. They managed to pay fealty to the original while carving out a new corner of the zone for themselves. The most junior member of the writing staff was a fellow by the name of Rockne S. O'Bannon.
I was writing as all, beginning writers do. I was writing spec everything. I was writing spec features. I was writing spec episodes of other TV shows that were on at the time. And there was a show that was on, it was ABC, a couple years before the new Twilight Zone came along. Called Dark Room, and it was like night gallery stories, but with more Twilight Zone like stories. And so I wrote a wordplay and then another short half-hour piece for that, and I actually managed to get the script into the producers of the show, and they very complimentary, but they said, the show had already been canceled. Thanks, no thanks. And they like to tell writing classes, the great thing about spec material is it never dissolves. It always survives on your hard drive. So I just held on to these little half-hour scripts that really would have no value otherwise, And then lo and behold, along came, a couple years later, both Twilight Zone and Amazing Stories, which was the Spielberg version of kind of a Twilight Zone, and was able to submit the scripts to both of them, and got very good response to the scripts, wordplay in particular, from both shows. But then Twilight Zone had me in right away and put me on staff, which was stunning to me, because I would have been thrilled to work on any crappy Universal hour show. So wordplay was the first thing I went in, and yeah, I was a huge fan of Harlan Ellison, obviously, before learning he was going to work on the show. And he wrote, which I have framed, a little paragraph before he ever met me, a little paragraph review of wordplay. He was commenting on all the material that was coming in, incredibly generous, and Harlan was nothing if not incredibly opinionated and evocative in writing. So when he liked something, he really liked it. If he really hates something, he really hates it. So it was like I benefited. I was on the positive side of that ledger. And the fact that I had Harlan being as kindly praiseworthy as he was just stunning to me. And Harlan was great. He was, as was everybody on the staff. It was a very writer-centric staff, and I was the new kid. And you could not be greener than I was. So I think everybody were very patient with me and generous with me, and Harlan very much among them. Just a fabulous introduction to the business, and I think Harlan, along with Phil DeGuerre and Alan Brenner and Jim Crocker, who made up the rest of the staff that first season, first half of the first season. It was just a fabulous entree into the biz.
Debuting in September of 1985, this new Twilight Zone broke from its predecessor in presentation. Unlike the original's half hour, this was an hour-long show, and afforded its creators the freedom to battle those dread commercial breaks that have always been the bane of dramatic television. One could conceivably tell an entire tale between the commercials. And like Rod Serling's other foray into televised anthology, Night Gallery, this format allowed several tales to be told in one sitting, which required an inordinate amount of material. Not only that, it had to be good, worthy of the original. That script that Harlan Ellison had praised so effusively and ultimately landed Mr. O'Bannon the job at Twilight Zone was wordplay, and is as every bit as incredible as advertised. And as such, it will form the basis of a future episode of this series. O'Bannon would contribute half a dozen outstanding stories for this new Twilight Zone, and in my humble opinion, was the one writer on the show who not only understood that this was a new Twilight Zone, but in script after astounding and prescient script, he managed to actually deliver a show that felt both contemporary and out of time. Any one of those stories could top a Best of Twilight Zone 85 list, or horror anthology list in general. But the one that I tout above all the others, the one that hit me where I lived and made me understand the shock and power of the Twilight Zone in a way I imagine a teen in 1962 had felt when To Serve Man turned out to be the title of a cookbook. This story aired on November 29th, 1985, titled simply The Shadow Man.
When you're 13 years old, you're supposed to be beyond those childhood fears of things that go bump in the night. Supposed to be. But for Danny Hayes, those fears are about to rear up before him from the shadows of the Twilight Zone.
Danny Hayes is scared, not only of the casual perils of daily life, but taking a stab at any of the awkward steps through adolescence. But it's worse than that. Danny's fears still dwell in the shadowed corners of childhood, where the closets hide monsters, and that tapping at the window isn't a branch.
Your father and I could understand this behavior when you were younger, but you are 13 years old now. You're a young man, and you should not have to sleep with all of these lights and the TV and the radio on.
But Mom...
No buts.
Danny Hayes is scared, and everyone knows it, which does nothing to help the social standing of the class brain that regularly blows the bell curve through his adherence to extra credit. Not the best position to attract the attention of Leanna, the girl he pines for, though it does set him in the sights of her boyfriend, Eric.
That was great, Danny. You know, there was some question for a while about you, man, but not anymore. Your reputation is still intact. You are still the biggest chicken in Willow Creek.
I'm not chicken.
Not chicken? What do you call running like that? Leaving poor Leanna, the woman you love.
Chicken. Bye.
Danny won't be scared for much longer. That night, a figure clad all in black emerges from beneath his bed.
I am the Shadow Man, and I will never harm the person under whose bed I live.
True to its otherworldly word, Danny remains unharmed that evening. The same can't be said for a young couple that were attacked, landing them in the hospital. While the new Twilight Zone would be a playground for emerging artists, it also employed some cinema veterans, and in the case of the Shadow Man, a Twilight Zone veteran. Joe Dante, in 1985, was white-hot from the success of Gremlins. That was his third solo feature. He had co-directed Hollywood Boulevard with Alan Arkish back in '76 for Roger Corman's New World Pictures, but it was his collaboration in 1983 that showcased his wildly inventive visual style and humor. Dante remade It's a Good Life for Twilight Zone, the movie. In an interview, he discussed his time on Twilight Zone 85. I'd already done an episode of Amazing Stories, too, which made the new Twilight Zone look like Poverty Road. The 80s Zone revamp was a different animal entirely from the Serling original, which was economically produced but benefited from the availability of the MGM backlot and Studio Gloss. The new series was shot very quickly at the former Republic Studios lot in Studio City, which only had a tiny backlot. Producer Phil DeGuerre was notorious for post-production tampering, and this was one of the first TV series edited on videotape. This allowed for much editorial mischief, as evidenced by director Gil Cates' complaint that his Paladin of the Lost Hour episode was botched by DeGuerre in cocaine-fueled editing, and when televised was officially credited to the fictitious DGA nom de plume Alan Smithy. As I recall, Rockne's existing script was pretty much a take-it-or-leave-it proposition. I don't recall much effort to enlist the directors in choosing material, although I can't believe that Friedkin just happened to end up with Nightcrawlers, which may be the best episode of the series. Once you hand in a TV episode, your involvement is pretty much over. I never met any of the music guys, who were hired long before I was. The music guys he mentioned, or guy in this case, was Merle Saunders. Fans of the Grateful Dead will recognize him as a frequent Jerry Garcia collaborator. Together they'd form Saunders-Garcia Band, which would become Legion of Mary, then Reconstruction. On his own, he released the world music classic Blues from the Rainforest in 1990. As such, his work here is all dark menace, with tribal percussion closing in the corners of the frame, while the haunted warble of a theremin plays.
Would you believe Eddie Myers said he's seen it? Personally, I wouldn't believe Eddie Myers if he said there was sand at the beach. I just wish they'd catch him.
He might be an escaped mental patient. There was one who escaped from Petersonsville 6 months ago. You figure he's been living in the woods, eating squirrels and birds.
I don't know anything that goes on.
Every night, the Shadow Man rises, and every night he assures Danny that he'll never harm the person under whose bed he lives. And every night, the attacks continue. But things begin to change for Danny. The once petrified boy becomes the only one seemingly brave enough to break curfew and stroll alone along the empty streets of Willow Creek. A bit of status he lets immediately go to his head, and one that sets him on a collision course with rival for Leanna's hand, Eric.
Hey, Eric, okay, sure, yeah, I'll fight you. But, not now. Tonight, at 9 o'clock, MacIver Park.
That's where the maniac's been seen the most.
Yeah.
Author Rockne S. O'Bannon.
I can't for the life of me remember where the idea came from. But again, we were trying as hard as we could generally to do twist ending, because that was what obviously the Twilight Zone was famous for. And it's a really tough thing to do because when the original Twilight Zone aired, again, twist endings in short stories were pretty commonplace, but certainly on television, that kind of, I wasn't expecting that. It wasn't that common. And to me, just a general, not even just twist endings, but a general good example of that is Eye of the Beholder in the original series.
Right.
The one which is entirely the entire first, other than the last 1 minute, the entire thing is predicated on us not seeing any of the characters, and the fact that you could do that and it wouldn't give away the ending, I think to me was a tribute to the fact that audiences were far more inexperienced in terms of being set up for a surprise. So, but here we come, 20 plus years later, and people watch the old Twilight Zone, and they're very obviously steeped in that kind of twist ending. So it's much harder to hide it, etc. So we were always trying to come up with, when we could, endings it shows with a twist ending. And Shadow Man was my tossing my version into the ring of it. And Joe was like the absolutely perfect choice for it. And obviously he'd done Gremlin shortly before, very hot director, really dug the script. And the intent was just to make it as absolutely scary as possible. And then to the degree that we succeeded, have a twist at the end. It's in the Twilight Zone world parlance. It's called a biter bit story, meaning someone who's a biter throughout most of the story. Suddenly he gets a bit at the end, hoisted on his own petard, if you will. Yeah, it was that. But again, Joe, such a really good filmmaker, and so totally understood what it needed, that he was able to create. It was all in camera, obviously. The Shadow Man, who looks two-dimensional a lot of the time.
Very, very oddly, yeah.
Yeah, which is wonderful because it just makes you go, okay, he's not entirely human somehow, all that sort of thing. And that's all totally filmmaking. And Joe was a huge, important contributor to that. Yeah. One of my faves.
When you talk about the twist, because we all got used to it from the original Twilight Zone, is what I particularly liked about this episode is it didn't feel like there was going to be a twist. And I think that's rare. Well, ordinarily, when you see an episode that's going to be predicated on what you feel it from the opening frame. And that's what I admired about this episode. Rewatching it, it doesn't feel like we're going there at all.
Thank you. That was one of the things that I learned from the show. And it was innate, I guess, in what I was doing up until then, because wordplay does the same thing. But working on the show, it crystallized it for me, which is that you can have I have the world's shortest attention span, as evidenced by this, but that's since I just stop in the middle and change direction. But I really have a criminally short attention span. So things that are all set up, just waiting for the twist ending, are very frustrating to me. I just, okay, I get it. I get the setup, just what's going to be the twist. But what I learned from the Twilight Zone experience was try to make the story itself, what the situation as compelling and give it escalation as much as possible, so that the story itself is compelling. Don't just rest on the laurel that you could have a twist ending. In Shadow Man, for example, it's exactly what you're talking about. I think there's a real escalation to his discovery of Shadow Man, then how he starts to use him, then how his standing with the other kids changes, and the escalation with the community's reaction to the fact that this is going on, all that sort of thing is all baked into it, so that you make a very good point, which I never realized. It also helps to disguise the twist as well. Yeah, that to me is why Shadow Man is interesting, compelling, whatever, leading up to the twist, as you've said. That's probably the reason why.
Well, look who's here.
Oh my God, Danny. Run!
Danny, come on! Something the matter? Hey! It's me! Don't you recognize me? Hey, you said you'd never hurt me! You promised!
The Shadow Man. And I will never harm the person under whose bed I live.
Well?
But I am a Shadow Man from under someone else's bed.
Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, is a proud member of Weirding Way Media. Our theme song was composed by HP with an assist from Donald Rubenstein and Erica Lindsay. If you want to hear these episodes early and commercial-free, become a patron over at patreon.com/Father Malone. Not only are the episodes up early, but we have extended interviews and bonus podcasts where we spotlight the best episodes of horror anthologies from every series. But if you just like the show and want to help, please share it with your friends and give us a rating on your favorite podcatcher. Together we'll keep journeying through the places that are just as real, but not as brightly lit.
Hello and welcome to Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys. My name is Hunter. In this podcast, I'll be joined by a different guest each week to discuss a classic Western movie or TV show. I've been a fan of classic Westerns for as long as I can remember, and in recent years, they've become very nostalgic for me. I love the aesthetic, the tropes, and I love seeing different filmmakers' takes on them. At their best, they're incredibly entertaining, rewatchable, and some of my all-time favorite movies are Westerns. We'll mostly focus on Western movies made in Hollywood, but we'll also be covering spaghetti Westerns, and one thing I'm very excited to get into are Western TV shows. I've got some amazing guests coming on the show, film professors, historians, and podcasters. And Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys is part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, and many guests on the show will be from other shows on the network. Thanks for listening.